StudyIQ IAS, आपका सिलेक्शन हमारा मिशन.
Hello everyone, we have Ambassador Shamma Jain with us. Welcome to StudyIQ IAS. सबका ध्यान इस समय वेनेजुएला पर है, लैटिन अमेरिका पर है. Who can be a better person than ma'am to have conversation on Latin America, Africa, Mediterranean politics? तो चलिए शुरुआत करते हैं. मैम, फ्रॉम द वेरी फर्स्ट क्वेश्चन, हर किसी के दिमाग में आज ये सवाल है कि इंडिया इस समय फॉरेन पॉलिसी फ्रंट पर मुसीबतों से घिरा हुआ है. बीट बांग्लादेश, नेपाल, पाकिस्तान, चाइना, वी नो, एंड ईरान पे हमें थोड़ा बैकफुट पर आना पड़ा ड्यू टू यूएस प्रेशर. तो क्या आपको लगता है कि वी आर लूजिंग समथिंग व्हेन इट कम्स टू आवर फॉरेन पॉलिसी एज?
Well, it is a difficult period. The international landscape is in turmoil, but that's not only for India. It's for just about every important country. The international order that existed post-Second World War has definitely now been upended in ways more than one. Particularly now in the last 1 year, we see that certain principles of the international order have completely been flouted. Since the world was already in a flux, let's not forget that the US is a superpower, China has caught up. So the rise of China is a very important factor, and that has had far-reaching consequences for all the regions of the world in many ways. So with that happening, and then the Ukraine conflict, particularly for that was a big jolt to the Western world. They hadn't fought conflicts on their territories. So it was outside. Now having within their own, continent and having one of their own important countries, though it's not a member of, EU, etc., but the conflict that's taken place, it's been, between Russia and Ukraine. Then you also had the Gaza conflict going on for so long. And then we had a brief spell, but a pretty intensive one between US attacking Iran, etc. Then also in Syria, the turmoil that's taken place. And suddenly, all of a sudden, and there have been some threats, we see that unilateralism today is becoming, diplomacy for some countries. That's a pollution, I'm sorry to say, which we all Indians have to fight. The point I'm trying to make is that the environment for the global environment for every country today is challenging, particularly for major players. India's emergence as an important, not only a regional, but a global player, a country which is today known for its robust economy. Yes, there are challenges. Despite the global headwinds, I would say, as today's date also shows, India's doing pretty well. It's our huge entrepreneurial base, our innovation, our technology, and a young, dynamic population. So given all that, the size of a population, the talent, the startups, there's energy in India. The last posting I did was in Greece, and when I came from there, what struck me was the youthfulness of the country, the entrepreneurial spirit, as we say, aspirational Indians, but they're actually doing it. You don't need capital today. You don't need, the previous tools you may not have. What you need is ideas. Plus, if you have technology, you have innovation. Government is trying to promote that environment. So there is this dynamism in the country. It's very dynamic. Yes, the challenges are manifold, particularly for, as you become more important geopolitically, economically, in terms of your leverage, definitely there will be many more against you. Let's not forget it. The old order, where the U.S. supremacy was there, the Western world, and now comes a player which is catching the imagination of the world. And let's not forget the Indians, the stamp of Indians. The biggest companies, your, Fortune 100 companies, many of them run by Indians. Technology has the imprint of Indians. So within that environment and Indian economy, the fifth largest, and hopefully we would be the third largest, and not, soon enough. So with all that, you can imagine in the limited area where there's a power play. The world system is based on power play. Let's not forget that. So that balance of power, now when the Western world sees that there are new players which are coming up, India particularly, and it's a democracy. It's not some kind of an autocratic country. It is a country which is transparent, where people like to do business, a country which is a fairly popular trade partner, despite some rhetoric we keep hearing, or tariffs, this, that. But it's not, in fact, the tariffs have come down largely. Somehow it's very important even to remember the context when we're talking about tariffs. India is, yes, we have billionaires, we have millionaires, but let's not forget our average per capita GDP. It's very low. We are carrying 1.4 billion people in a democratic setup. I think it is a huge contribution to the world peace. Such a huge population for one country to shoulder, and to have a country where there's debate, there's technology, where there's open frame of mind, where there's discussion, where there's ancient philosophy, resurgence of that, there's entrepreneurship, there's a business spirit. With all that happening, so India has, I think, India's emergence, but India's emergence has not challenged the world order. India is a player which likes to play peacefully with others. If you see that, even when we have development partnership programs with other countries, we don't try to trap them. These are very transparent. For example, with Africa, we tell them, what kind of programs do you want? It's community development programs. Whereas you see some other some other players in the world, yes, they also try to give development aid, assistance, but with a very clear motive for their geo-economic reasons, very clearly. Let's be clear, China's Belt and Road Initiative, yes, it's popular, but you've seen what it has led to. Debt traps all over the world. There's intransparency. Many countries have backed out of that, saying, sorry, it doesn't suit us. It's just an example. So with a country of India's size, India's economy, with its technology, with its dynamic business environment, with its business community, investing abroad, and youthful, well-talented Indians. So country like that, I think the most important aspect which we need to keep in mind is India has always tried to preserve its autonomy, its strategic autonomy. We never played a second fiddle to others in the sense doing things as dictated by others. We never did that.
So, ma'am, this is good about India. We have listed down what are the edges India is having, right? And there's geopolitical flux that is going on. But pointing to the challenges that India is having right now on foreign policy front. So can you please pinpoint some of these so that when we open this discussion in layers, by the end of this discussion, our students would be able to know and they will have some further points to even write in their answers.
Yes. There are multiple challenges which have emerged on the foreign policy front. First, right in our neighborhood. Operation Sindoor was what we were forced to launch. That shows the turbulence in our, on our western front. Of course, for many years we've been a target of terror, drug trafficking. Let's not forget that. Drug trafficking, narco trafficking, that I think US said that Venezuela was exporting, and right, we've been very clearly proven it. That's their track record, having training camps all over, and then acquiring modern defense equipment. And it's very unfortunate, a country like America, I would say, a democracy, a country which tries to promote democratic values. Today, like in the past they are once again wooing the military generals in the country, the field marshal. He's being feted there. And that makes the world sit back. And so I think this regression of democratic values, it's definitely a challenge for India, because a country a democracy like India works very well with other like-minded democratic countries, because public opinion is important. You cannot stifle and suppress and have, your autocratic either economic models or political models, etc. It's a democracy. So a country to our west, today it's been a hotbed of, I would say, of extremism. Mm-hmm. So along with extremism, if it's military leadership, today it's very clearly being run by its military. I mean, civilian governments only, as in the past as well, yes. That's only, it's a camouflage. So China, Pakistan, and being wooed by because of business elements. And that's unfortunate for a country like India, which tries to promote certain democratic values, to see some transient business interests, yes, maybe of certain elements in the US and in Pakistan converging. That's further a challenge to a country like India. And much worse is Bangladesh. We've had such stable relationship, and it helped both the countries. The programs that India's launched, that India has developed, the assistance or, even some aid, etc., and consultations with Bangladesh, it's been a relationship of collaboration and cooperation, and helped Bangladesh very much. And today it's unfortunate that country, it's like rabid elements. There's upsurge of fundamentalism. There are extremist elements. And you can see the violent clashes, minorities, the way they are being attacked. So that's definitely a huge challenge on that front as well. And if the military leadership in Pakistan and this transitory kind of leadership, which say they'll have elections in February, let's see how they go. And their collaboration, it's just not for the good of anybody. So that definitely is a challenge in our neighborhood. India, which has this neighborhood first policy, whether it's floods anywhere, whether it's earthquake anywhere, first responders India has been. And now when that you see, despite all that India tries to do, that a cooperative framework of good neighborliness, good neighborhood policy. So in Pakistan, those elements, the military, and even offering their rare earth minerals if they have to the US, and making this very transient commercial, their personal commercial interest-based relationship. And Bangladesh, the way it is going. Nepal has also seen its own transition. So neighborhood, I would say immediate neighborhood, yes, definitely it's a challenge. But the wider, because India is not only locked within its neighborhood, India today is a global player. So what really matters is, of course, some basic elements like if the UN Charter, which was the basic, the foundation of the international order, if that's being threatened, if we say that territorial integrity of the country, our territorial integrity was flagrantly violated soon after independence and today, and that resulted in seizure of a large chunk of Jammu and Kashmir, what is Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, and that still continues to be there. So, the world has really to sit back and take note of that India suffered from that, despite terrorism, despite those invasions on our territory, etc. Still we have maintained, in fact, we've gone in for more democratization and not less. Now, the challenges would be US, the biggest player. For us, Indo-Pacific, stability in Indo-Pacific is of great consequence. Let's not forget that much of the oil through this sea lanes of communication, the oil flows that, and there are certain important choke points. And what we are seeing is kind of, I would say, increasing use of pressure, belligerent force in the South China Sea, right? We are seeing that increasingly. The territorial claims that China has vis-a-vis other countries, whether it's Vietnam or it's Indonesia and Philippines, etc., all that. With Taiwan, the kind of, you can see it's ratcheting up. So when you talked about Venezuela, that is a very bad precedent, because that may induce some other countries to launch such adventurous, I would say, operations. So if stability and order in the Indo-Pacific, it is disturbed, it is definitely a huge challenge to India. And with now that US is paying more attention to making America great first, kind of withdrawing itself. I mean, it says it's Indo-Pacific is important, but we don't see that, the developments which were taking place until about a year back, now they seem to be kind of being put on the back burner.
Especially in this new national security strategy that they have released.
The new national security, exactly, a strategy that you can see. You can imagine what is the priority today for the superpower today. If Nigeria is attacked, is it to save the Christians there? I mean, the world really thinks about that. Is it because of its oil reserves? So Venezuela, it's not to restore democracy, definitely not. Mm-hmm. It is to, and they've said very clear, US is in charge, US companies will go there, US companies, and various statements have been made. It's very, very clear. And many US senators and congressmen have raised this issue that it was a military incursion. Let's call it what it is. Yeah. The Congress is authorized to make the declaration. They did not do it. Because somewhere you can see that not only in international or in the international order, sovereignty of countries is being threatened or has been violated, or territorial integrity has been breached, or threat of use of force is increasingly being employed as a tool of coercive diplomacy, if I could say that, of statecraft. More than that, even because the world, America always prided itself on being of a democracy, oldest democracy, and there within the country, somehow the impression is that Congress is abdicating its own responsibilities. So
or we can say Congress has not been given chance.
No, I think Congress is trying, but you can say, for example, criticism is made of Russia. We understand that Putin is authoritarian. But here what you're seeing in a country which claims to be the oldest democracy, which has its institutions, which has its press, which still issues reports on the state of democracy in other countries, the status of religious freedom in other countries. The other day, I think a handful of US legislators decided to write to India about one person who made threats, who used incendiary language, even some actions, and who's behind bars in our country under the system and under the laws in this country. They're so worried about his freedom. I, as a citizen of the country, am worried about the citizens of the people in America, even the people who are settled there, who got naturalized citizens, or the people on H-1B visas. There are no rules. The entire system has been upended in the name of immigration. Same way, yes, there is upsurge of right-wing in Western Europe as well. Even in Latin America, you see that. So the world is today, there's definitely anti-immigrant threat. Indians are there. There's about 35 million diaspora. But that Indian diaspora, the world should not forget, has contributed to whichever country they went to. Whether they are the political leaders in the Caribbean, in Latin America, even the former the president of Portugal was of Indian origin. And let's not forget the Silicon Valley, the pride of America. It's technology, it's innovations, education system, it's STEM. Basically, I mean, it's immigrants, and Indians are very important, form the, I would say, majority of that. So they contributed to that country, its economy, its intellectual power, its soft power, its hard power, etc. So with that, this sentiment against immigrants, that's one also, because then you do not perhaps differentiate who are the good immigrants or the bad in this upsurge of that. And
But sorry to interrupt. If we observe current political developments across the world from realist lens, don't you think transactional diplomacy, a transactional way of handling world affairs has always been there with toppings of idealism? Right now what we are observing, that topping is getting reduced and transactional diplomacy is getting to the surface. What's your take on this?
Having been a practitioner of democracy, while I would say that to some extent I would agree with you, yes, there's always been the Western world's professed belief in democratic values.
Yeah.
But one always saw that when the relationship with China is important to them. They want investments from China.
Yeah.
They want Chinese markets. They want all that. Then all these personal liberty, freedom, and all these freedoms that they talk about.
Same with Saudi. Same with Saudi. Saudi
No, definitely. I mean, for long, particularly, US has always is known for wooing dictators.
Yeah.
Whether it was Saudi Arabia, UAE, you're seeing now again the relationships, the relationship between Saudi Arabia and US, the upswing you see in the relationship based on business relationship very clearly, and that too personality driven. It's becoming more personality driven, which also poses creates its own challenges in the international diplomatic arena, because where the institutions come into play. You know, for example, in the US, Congress has been playing an important role, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, the Intelligence Committee. Now you see, of course, it's both the House, I mean, the Senate as well as the House is led by the Republicans. But see, despite that, it's the executive defining the rules in every manner, whether it's the judiciary. Today, judiciary also is so silent. Of course, many judges are appointed by the executive today, but you can see that there's silence in that country. And that silence is deafening for the world. Because the threat is to Venezuela. It's not only to Venezuela. It's a threat to the global order. And even the Western world is saying today, they all are raising this question openly. There's Greenland. And the Secretary of State said it in very clear terms, unequivocally. Yes, if the force has to be used, force will be used in Greenland. In Greenland. Why? Because U.S. national security is threatened. I really do not understand. It's not even far-fetched. It's not even far-fetched. So in the name of national security, whether Nigeria is bombarded, whether Syria is bombarded, or whether Venezuela, this military incursion takes place, and the head of state, whether he's an autocrat or whatever, he's seized, he's captured and made a prisoner, all this upends the very basis of the order, because it's unilateral unilateralism. I would say unilateral American interventionism to the extent that you decide. If you talk about drug cartels, they are operating from Pakistan, along with terrorism. Countries have been banned, which will not be given visa. I was looking, where does my neighboring country figure in? Nowhere. You have Tanzania, you have Guinea, you have a whole lot of countries. and the country which has its fingerprints on every terror network in the world, proven, whether it's in Europe today, even today, or whether it's in the US, of course, the biggest of all, Osama bin Laden, right from there, from the own garrison state, Abbottabad is caught. So that country gets a clean sheet. So definitely, it's not even a double game. It is, I would say, completely, it's flouting the international norms, and that already the international order, it's been fluid because US's retreat in a way, US's influence declining, China emerging, and China with its own brand of China's geopolitical interests are very, very clear. Its economic interests, we all know that. And China using its geopolitical influence, its investments or its technology or its aid and development for its very clear economic objectives. With all that, the world was already fluid. And now with even the basic principles being breached in such a flagrant manner that today the Western Europe is, I think they are also, their reaction only shows you that it's not only India's worries which have increased, even the transatlantic relationship today, the US's major allies, the Western world, is saying like NATO is dead. Where do we go? There's a questioning. So that definitely has made the foreign policy tasks much more challenging for the countries, more for democratic countries, which tend to go by the rules, by the playbook, including India.
Ma'am, don't you think this kind of rule breaking by US or collectively by West has been a practice before as well? Take example of Iraq, or say, support in Libya, regime change in Libya, and what turmoil they have left, and many other countries as well. So this playbook has been used earlier as well. Main problem is new power is getting the space at much faster rate, and the West as a word is getting ruptured. This is creating major flux in current dynamics. What's your take in this?
Definitely, that's you. I think you're just spot on saying that the Western world is getting ruptured. The entire international order was based on transatlantic relationship. They framed the rules. The P5, most of them, they are the ones. They had the privileges. It was their world. They carved out their, indirectly spheres of influence. So now, and of course, like, the Western world, of course, saying that Russia has violated all the norms by attacking a country. Definitely so, we agree. But of course, Russia had its own reasons or whatever, not, which one should study objectively in a way. But as India said, where was the Western world when right in Afghanistan, our neighbor, where it's so important to us, this is a historical neighbor, where India has made huge development investments, where we've run programs for the women, for their youth, etc., etc. When you use that, when you had your counterterrorism program, all that, and suddenly you decided to get out of that country, leaving it in such turmoil that the entire neighborhood gets challenged. The Taliban, it's upsurge, a resurgence of Taliban, etc., etc. Definitely, and I would like to make a point very clear. What you said is very true, but then there's this veneer of, rules, the Western values. Yes, they do try to promote them, but when it suits them. It's very selective agenda. Let me not, I would like to make that point. Yeah. For example, we used to be called out, India has been the most pluralistic country in the world, the most country which has, no country is more diverse than India as far as my experience goes there. Mm-hmm. Every religion of the world, every language, physically we're different, everything in India exists, and we coexisted. Mm-hmm. Not propagating it, but our daily lives we live. Like my first name is a Muslim name. Think about that. Just shows we live with different religions, different philosophies, because India has been a tolerant country. Let's not forget that. The invaders came, got absorbed. We even, appreciated some of their architecture, though they plundered our country. A country which was one of the richest economies in the world was left completely impoverished. Let's not forget that. So in these years of, after 1947, have come a long way. Definitely the world, some of the old powers, for them it's not very easy. Let's not forget that. Particularly when their own power is in decline. And quite the Western world today, the largest economy, Germany, they're stagnant, they're not growing. And these countries, there's no population. I was in Greece, it was shocking that the youth of the country, they left because of their debt problems, and they're only pensioners. How do you support an economy with the pensioners? In Italy, as a demographics, the aging population. In Germany, is the aging population. You don't want immigrants, we understand, So there's a right-wing upsurge, then you have declining population. Then you have, of course, now with AI, with new technology, you need youth, you need younger workforce. So with all that happening, and particularly the Western world was, I think, ensconced in a very secure world because of the US umbrella under NATO. And now when they feel that US today doesn't lend much significance to NATO, and if they are quite worried about it, that if Greenland is being challenged and that's an autonomous territory of Denmark, then what is left there? So if NATO's foundation is being weakened, then the Western Europe, I think there is scramble for ways to step up their own defense mechanisms, look for security. So that deep feeling of insecurity has crept in. It's on the defense front. It is military reasons, much more economic decline, aging population. So a combination of all that. Their protector, the US today, is playing by different playbook, by new kind of playbook, which we also don't know. It changes at times every day. So there is confusion. There's a lot of uncertainty. The Western world is feeling unhinged. But now what has happened in Latin America, you began with Venezuela. I was there, began my career in Argentina. Then I was in Panama with Costa Rica, Nicaragua as my countries of concurrent accreditation. It's an important, the Western Hemisphere, US has traditionally treated it as its backyard. We all know about the Monroe Doctrine. Yes. But over the years, there'd been decline of that, and China has stepped in a very important fashion. Today, China is the largest trading partner of Latin American countries. Yes. It has invested hugely in the infrastructure of Latin America and its energy resources. Don't forget that Latin America is crucial for food security of the world, for its energy, critical minerals. It's a very important region of 33 Latin American countries. And now what has happened is China's inroads that it has made into Latin America, so much so, China, through its development aid, through investment in infrastructure projects, through its credit, and through its companies, various companies, and many of them are state companies. You never know where the distinction is, private companies, state companies. So this is all shrouded in transparency. With all that, and also Belt and Road, about 24 Latin American countries have joined BNRI, of course with doubts, and they're skeptical now. With all that, China's not going to retreat easily, and now US is trying to reassert, saying it's our Western Hemisphere. And Rubio, Secretary of State Rubio, made a very unequivocal statement saying, this is our Western Hemisphere. We cannot have rivals, antagonistic players there. So how China is going to, this rivalry between China and the US in the Western Hemisphere will also have huge repercussions. You see, Venezuela was also an important source of crude oil for India. In fact, it's heavy crude oil. Our refineries were quite geared towards that, the Russian crude oil on this. And even, Reliance Industries, they've had a 15-year-long crude supply chain, their agreement for that. All that upended because of US sanctions. China imposed sanctions on Iran. You cannot import oil. And then, of course, we've diversified over the years from Nigeria. We got from Angola and UAE and, all that. So the sources, traditional sources of our oil was all put an end to because of unilateral sanctions. As you said, there was hypocrisy. These are not UN-led sanctions. These are unilateral. Sorry, not UN-led. Unilateral sanctions. A country decides, it's an axis of evil powers. Sometimes the countries think about it. They step back. Who's playing that role today? I think we all are trying to understand behind the rhetoric. Is it only rhetoric? But no, unfortunately, the rhetoric is being matched with adventurism. So if Venezuela, they say that the resources are there, I think many other countries, because Latin America has critical rare earth minerals. The lithium triangle, it's very well known with Chile, Bolivia, and Argentina. They're so important with transit to green technologies and your EVs and all that. And for America also rare earth is so important, rare earth minerals. So other countries will also be fearing. It causes regional instability. And where China has invested in other countries, definitely, for example, Panama, where I was posted. It's in fact the identity of Panama is defined by its Panama Canal, right? It's Panama Canal. And it was a huge feat of engineering by US engineers, agreed. But it helped US in a huge manner. And now for the US to say that the Panama Canal should be administered once again by US, it's a huge statement. It's loaded with repercussions. I was in Panama, and for people there, a small country, it's stable politically amidst that, Colombia has had its insurgencies and with FARC and with the far left, all that. And so it's a stable country. Of course, it has its banking system, offshore free banking sometimes is questioned, but so has US its offshore banking, so has the UK and Western countries with all that. So with this banking system, good banking system, there are more than 60-70 banks, international banks, with this tourism, Panama Canal being an important source of revenue, and Panama Canal being very strategic, and Panama is very strategically located. It links North America with South America, right? Extremely. If you have to do business with whole of Latin America, this is the important country. It was very important for Panamanian pride. I saw them when I was there saying, this is where the Americans, administered, they lived. This was like, and it took them so many years, this Carter-Torrijos agreement. It was, I think, signed in 1977 and was implemented in 1999. So many years for slowly transitioning. And now for Panama Canal, which is their pride, which is a resource, for them to say we take back is a huge threat. And that's your entire Central America. So, and Central America, there's also the question of immigration, etc. But if you're drug trafficking, etc., President Obama's statement I was hearing that less than 1% of drugs coming into the US are from Venezuela. Colombia is the biggest source.
Yes.
But as I said, drugs we all know in our Western neighborhood where it's coming from.
Yes.
So these are just as you said, these were the layers which are being ripped off and from under the harsh reality. But this harsh reality, definitely, whether it's in the world of business or the world of politics, the world of diplomacy, the value system is not always adhered to. It's very selectively. We all know that. But at least there was some semblance of it. There was, you still have UN playing some important role, though the UN remains highly flawed. I personally would say that if that's post-Second World War orders being upended, perhaps what needs to go out of the window is the privilege which has been entrenched for the P5, because that completely erodes the sanctity and the worth of the UN system. And UN is the only world body which still has some impact, which still is important. But today the US having truncated its budget to the US, and many countries, don't forget that, they are having their bilateral arrangements of payments. They don't pay to the UN budget. They will have maybe with UNDP Development Fund, they will have. So with all that, but still there is a semblance of some order. There's some predictability. But now with Venezuela, and now saying Greenland could be the next, we don't know. He's also made a statement that Mexico, threat to Mexico, which is an important, imagine so an immediate neighbor, an important neighbor, which was, let's not forget the NAFTA days, the North Africa Free Trade Agreement, the North America, Canada, US, Mexico. And Mexico is an important source of, for manufacturing in the supply chain of the US. And then that NAFTA was, replaced by USMCA, etc.
Yeah.
So an important, its neighbor, and that neighbor, first the Gulf of Mexico, the America. These are not very small symbolic, steps. They point towards a direction. We just hope we don't get back to this gunboat diplomacy days. When you're talking about freedom of navigation, you're talking about the rights. I think some of the US legislators did rightly raise the issue, and that was alarming for everybody when the boats, near Venezuela, the crew were just killed in very
more than 30
questionable,
people
more than 30 people in questionable circumstances. That was alarming enough. We talked about piracy. We know about piracy happening there. Somalia doing that, this, that, in Gulf of Aden. Here it is your deliberate attacks on the boat, saying that they are all drug cartels.
But ma'am,
it's the mafia.
Yeah, but whole world was silent at that point of time. Means they were having their own diplomatic overtures of balance when USA is doing everything off balance. Yeah. Now coming to the Latin America, it is said that since Latin America is hotbed of politics right now, right? Considering ABC triangle, Chile, Argentina, Bolivia, and now Venezuela. With respect to India and Latin America, they have sense of each other. It seems like they have not made up their mind regarding each other. What's your take on this? Where are we in our relationship, in our approach?
Definitely. Okay. You talked about Latin America and India, that they have not made up their mind about each other. I would tend to differ a bit. I think they have made up their mind. They're very clear that there are huge opportunities, and those opportunities should just not remain on paper. They need really to be utilized. But do not forget that there are a number of factors there. One is that Latin America today, Latin American countries, the major economies, Brazil, Mexico, Chile, Argentina used to be. So from time to time, these countries swing from the left to the right. And these are very radical swings. So the entire politics of the region then gets divided along those lines, and those lines get sharper. At present, for example, there's one, just to put things in context, I was just checking what has been the criticism of major countries of Latin America as a threat to them, to their hemisphere. Well, Brazil expectedly said that it's a breach of sovereignty, territorial integrity, all that. And some other countries like Cuba, Venezuelan, of course, Dr. Jesse Rodriguez making statements and all that. And Argentina also made some statements. But the countries which criticized were, the countries which criticized were Argentina and I think it was El Salvador. So there's a grouping, a regional grouping, which has played a role because it's a grouping of the entire Latin American Caribbean countries called CLAC, Community of Latin America and Caribbean Countries. They met, but they could not come up with one resolution. That just shows the schism within the Western Hemisphere today as it exists today. So while Brazil and Chile also has been swinging. Right now it's more left. The divisiveness of the hemisphere, they could not even condemn, they couldn't come up in one voice against the incursion in their own region. That shows the weakness, the political weakness. Now, do not forget that the economic headwinds have affected the entire world, the economic uncertainties post-corona and the supply chains being disrupted, etc. But countries like the biggest economies, like countries like for Brazil, Argentina, Mexico, because particularly Brazil, Argentina, etc., they're very clear that India is an important trading partner. India is an important voice even on at regional and international forum. A country which has heft, political diplomatic heft, so country which matters. In the last 5 years or so, that India, for some of these important countries like Brazil, Chile, Argentina, India is one of the top 5 destinations, of their exports. So it is important. Number 2, as I said, for food, this area remains important. We used to import huge quantities of sunflower from Ukraine, but during this conflict that's going on, we've been importing, because India imports huge quantities of vegetable oils. We've been importing soybean oil from Argentina. In fact, in 2024, Argentina is about, I think, 50% of exports of soybean oil came to India. And even from Brazil, we've been importing sugar and then crude oil, etc. Indian companies have made investments. The volumes need to go up. Our trade would be about, I think, $35 billion, which is nothing. I'm not comparing, but still, we are not comparing China and India, and these are two different things, two different sets of, one is an autocracy and one is, transparent, with businessmen making up their own mind and deciding what they need to do that. But still, like, China has about $25 billion worth trade, and we are 35. We are not comparing yet. It shows you, particularly, a lot of Indian companies have made investments in green energy. Our IT companies are there. We are providing employment. So they look at India, that in all this today, India has emerged as an attractive hub of technology, and the world is being driven by technology, right?
Yeah.
So, the future is going to be centered around technology, and India being an important player there, Indian technical talent, our talent being very important there, and India, I think somewhere we should not lose sight of the fact that what India does, qualitatively, the world does recognize that. During COVID, when rest of the world, we saw how they behave, how they behaved, I would say, what their approach was to the suffering, and how India, despite its own huge population, still stood up for others, shared its co-shield with others, shared its vaccinations with other medicines. So people do notice that, and we have people do realize that India is a reliable partner. India may be a bit slow, as I say, an elephant, but we charge on, we go on. It's reliable, it's transparent, and it's in the long range, it is important. So I think that's very clear. Even Indian companies, a number of IT companies are there. Some Indian companies are investing now in mining in Peru and I think Chile, etc. Even Cineplex, imagine they are there. In fact, our famous Bollywood Kidzania is there in one of the countries. That awareness has been there. Indian businessmen at times tend to be more risk averse than they should be. But if you're global players, you have to go out. And Latin America is culturally very different. When I was there, I realized that we would tell our businessmen, don't come here for short trips to sell some medicines. For pharma, we have made inroads, but we can be supplying in a much bigger manner to the government hospitals. And there, Panama, because when I was there, we had got a number of our pharmaceutical companies, Pharmaxil, Chemexil, etc. With Panama, because of its strategic location, can be a hub where the vaccine companies, for Indian vaccines, for Indian pharma, generics, that this could be a hub and supply at short notice for the government bids all over Latin America. For pharma companies, for IT companies, educational collaboration, mining, we import some gold from Peru, etc. It needs to go up for our automobile parts, our Bajaj bikes in Guatemala and all these Central American countries in Nicaragua are quite popular. Also, people, if you go everywhere, you see yoga centers and all, how much they translate into hard power, that's a different thing. But I'm saying India as a positive player, they have recognized, but more dynamism needs to be lent, a bigger thrust needs to be given there. Yeah. The visits have been taking place. PM Modi, went to Brazil and then he was in Argentina. In fact, Dr. Desi Rodriguez has much been in news, the vice president she's been to India, I think 4 or 5 times she was here in 2025, she was in India for Energy Week. She was there in 24. In 23, actually, CII had its 9th India LAC conclave, and I chaired one of the sessions on agriculture, and she was there. So, interaction with the leadership has been taking place. Mm-hmm. In fact, that brings me to the point that with American companies going back and, our ONGC, Oil Videsh had invested there. Indian Oil Corporation was there. We still have, I think, about maybe $100 billion worth locked up. Our money is there, credit, etc. That could perhaps we'll find some ways of unlocking that. And also, I think, we had this ONGC was in upstream extraction, etc. So I think Indian companies would be ready to go and work once again. And in fact, only last year, just to show that India is a partner, development, whether for technology, setting up centers of innovation, IT excellence. In fact, last year, India had approved around, I think, if I'm not mistaken, about $100 million through India UNDP Development Fund, Partnership Fund for Venezuela for a community program. Yeah. Okay. So we've been involved, but a greater thrust, I think, even as some of our chemical companies are there. I know some of the players there. But, Latin America requires a long haul. You can see China invested for how many years in Venezuela.
Yeah.
China had given something like $100 billion to Venezuela for its infra, for its ports, roads, all that, and getting oil. China needed oil, and here is the country with the largest reserves, so they were getting all the oil.
Yeah.
And also, I think they have about 10 billion worth of debt. So they spent decades and decades on doing that. India has been doing it because India businessmen, they're private businessmen. It's not that the state India leads the flag; it's private economy, it's private sector. But I think definitely the point you make is very important. That our business community, our business chambers need to do in a more aggressive manner and not at a small scale go and sell, like they would come do some pharma deals. I used to tell them, look at it in a more strategic manner for long haul. Use Panama as a hub for shipping. India is important for shipping, and here's a Panama, which a country known for its registry, of convenience. The countries register, the ships register there. So with all that, definitely these are times of uncertainties, of concern, and some fear as apprehensions. What next?
Yeah. So thank you, ma'am. Thank you for giving your time. And I wish that all of you are going to make some notes, take important points. और जो भी आपके क्वेश्चंस हो, feel free to raise those questions in comments and we'll request ma'am to come again, और फिर उन questions को भी हम take up करेंगे. फिर मिलते हैं. ख्याल रखिए अपना. जय हिंद.
Thank you for having me over. Thanks.
StudyIQ IAS, आपका सिलेक्शन हमारा मिशन.